Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Talentica Tech Talk. Today, I have here with me Mohammed. He's a solutions architect in Talentica, and he will present one of the hard problem that he has solved in one of his projects. And if you have any questions that you want to ask, please feel free to type them in the chat in the Twitch itself, and I'm monitoring it actively, and we will answer all your questions that you have. Over to you, Mohammed.
Hello everyone. So today I'm going to talk about one of the problems that we solved for our customer, and the topic is basically the transient dataset with table value parameter. So this is one of the features provided by SQL Server, which we have used to solve one of the problems. This is the brief agenda of what we are going to cover in this tech talk today. So I'm going to basically explain what the existing application was like. So the existing application that we had to work on was an enterprise legacy application. It was on .NET, and the database that we were using was SQL Server. This application was actually a standalone application which was used only by a couple of users. So it was a console application, and this application basically just generates some data which was used by the main application. So again, the overall objective of this project was to make this application a part of the main application, so that multiple users should be able to use this application. And again, as a part of that whole problem, we kind of this was a smaller part of the problem which we solved to make it the part of the main application. This application, what it essentially does is it's the core logic of this application was written in a stored procedures. There were many stored procedures, and what this does is basically it gets the data from multiple sources. So there are nightly builds for the databases available, and based on those data sources, it generates a persistent data set. So whenever we run a stored procedure, so basically you can consider it as like for a given month, I want to generate some sort of data which can be which I can use to analyze and look up the data that okay, this is fine or not. So again, this stored procedures was very complex, and it was not easy to rewrite. So and again, whenever we run this stored procedure, it basically generates some persistent data set in the database, which are then used to run the analysis part. So basically, when these data sets are generated, they are kind of emailed to the different stakeholders, and once they see these reports, they then say that okay, there is some discrepancies in the data that is being generated. So then other parties basically fix that data, and then this process is repeated till the data looks okay for a given month, let's say. Whenever we run this stored procedure, every time a new persistent data set is generated. If the data is not correct, the data set needs to be generated again. So again, whenever we run this stored procedure, a new data set is created. What happens is that as many times as we create this data set, these data sets remain in the database, and once the analysis is complete, there is no use of these data sets. So basically, we need to clean up all those data sets which are there in the database right now. So yeah, and once the data set is looks correct, it can be marked as published. So basically, when we think of long term, only we are concerned about the published data sets. The rest all data sets is just they are just temporary data sets, and were used for analysis purposes. So yeah, this was the existing application, and the problem that we were trying to solve is the first one was like there was no way to explore the data without calling the persistent data set. So if we go by the existing architecture, we have to create those persistent data sets, and we have to use those to explore the data, like basically query the data in some sort of manner. So again, one way to do this was to rewrite everything in the stored procedure and basically move everything, all the business logic and persistent from stored procedure to the application side. Right, but that was again not a very straightforward approach because as it was just being used by a couple of users and the stored procedure itself was very complex. So we couldn't make those changes on the application side. So that was one of the problems and moving everything. So the second problem was searching across multiple data sets. So right now I can just generate data set for a month and use it for analysis. But let's say I want to generate data for multiple a period of months, let's say 5 months or 6 months. So there was no way to do that. I have to just generate those persistent data sets, and then we could write just multiple joins and unions and the dynamic SQL to combine all those data and then present it to the user for for analysis purposes. So this is the crux of the problem basically, which we were able to solve with the help of table value parameter. So this was the main problem. Basically, we want to provide the search facility so that user can look at the data set for a month and can perform query on that data. And I mean, the based on whether the data is fine or not, we could just mark it as the as published. And and since this data, since this application was to be used by the actual application user, the main application user, so working with persistent data set may give rise to concurrency issues since this data resides on the actual tables. So we may run into some problems accessing the data. So concurrent users may be accessing that data, and again, this was not the actually the problem, but we were thinking that okay, we may have to handle concurrent access to these data sets. So that was another problem that that basically we have solved with the table value parameter. So I hope there is no question till now.
No questions I have seen so far.
So I'm going to show you how the existing application look like. So let me just, I just created a web API project which basically have multiple endpoints. One is to generate the data and another is to fetch the data. Okay, so this first part is the this data endpoint. So I'm just going to give some name here. So let me just say, and again, this taking just a month ID. If there is a mapping for this month ID in the application, I'm just going to give 5 here. So it is basically calling this stored procedure, create data, and once that data is generated, it is going to return me an ID of that data set that is being generated. So with this, I mean, I'm going to show you in the database state. Okay, so as we can see, this my schema.demo2 is created. So this is the data set that I'm talking about. So this has a lot of data. I mean, this is a sample application, so you are seeing a very less number of data, but in the actual application, this data set may contain more than 10,000 rows of data. And again, the columns are also very less here, but there are more than 30 columns of data. So I mean, this is the data set that is being generated, and if I want to fetch this data, there is another endpoint I have written. Where again, this is calling another stored procedure. So yeah, I have fetched all the data for that given month, which for which that data is generated. So yeah, if I see how this data source is generated, data set is generated. So I'll just going to go to the stored procedure, and yeah, this is the data. This is the stored procedure which generates the data. Again, this is a very simplified version of the actual stored procedure. So in this case, what it is doing is it is getting the data from the external source table, and this is again very this external source table I have created, which contains a lot of data and for different months. So I have created this to simulate the complex stored procedure from which this actual data set is generated. Right now, it is just passing in the querying in based on the month ID that I'm passing, but and it is storing it into a table basically, which I am passing it like the name of the table. So in this case, this demo2 is the table in which the data set was generated. Okay, so and yeah, there is another table which basically contains the metadata about this data set, the ID of the data set, and whether it is published or not. So, and I'm returning that data from the data table. Right. So this is what the application look like. You have to first generate the data, and then you have to fetch that data from the database based on the ID, and this data can then be used for analysis purposes. So this is all persistent data, like I'm creating actual data sets here, right? So yeah, this was the simple demo application. Yeah, so the solution that we implemented was we basically added an anti-corruption layer using wrapper stored procedure. So there were some existing stored procedure based on top of which we wrote wrapper stored procedure. And what these stored procedure were doing was basically instead of persisting the data into the data set, it basically generates transient data set, and these data sets were then returned from those stored procedure, which can be used for analysis and search purposes, right? So yeah, the way it does is using the table valued parameter, which I'm going to cover the next. So instead of writing it to the disk, just return the data in the form of table valued parameter. And this using this approach basically gives us a lot of flexibility, like the data is not persistent and it is just generated based on whatever input that you are passing, and we can generate we can call existing stored procedure as many times as we want to generate the data over a period of time, and that can be used for analysis purposes also. So
Mohammed, all this data needs to be loaded into the user interface to analyze, or your application memory, or how do you
yeah, so
reuse it
when
basically?
so when yeah, so we also developed the UI for this. So if we are searching, if we want to load the particular data set, this has to be loaded into the UI side also. So from the application side also, and from the UI to the UI, this data has to be passed. And on the UI itself, in the grid, basically, we can we have provided for search functionality. So whatever
Okay.
search he wants to perform, he can do it on the UI side.
Okay, and if we call the stored procedures multiple times, then all the execution still happens, or it reads the data from some kind of cache or something?
No, so there was no cache here. Every time it hits the database and gets the data.
Okay, okay, thanks.
So yeah, and yeah, as I said, with the help of this, the only change that we had to do was basically when we call the existing stored procedure, it was instead of writing it to the data set, it was just returning a table valued parameter, which was then used by the wrapper stored procedure to return the data to the user, to the calling functionality. Right, and with the help of this, we were able to generate data for a given time range, not only for a single month. And yeah, since the data is not persisted, The concurrency issues were also handled because the data was persistent only in case where we when we want to submit the database or publish the database. So those were the only time we had to handle the concurrency part. Apart from that, it worked pretty well. So what is a table valued parameter? So I mean, in SQL Server, we can create our own table type with this syntax. So create type, and I can provide my own type as table, and then we can pass. This is similar to the normal table that we create using the parameters and the type. So here I have created my data type with the name and age as its field. So I'm going to show you on the database side how it looks like. And once this data, the table type is created, it can be used in stored procedure as well as functions. I can pass it. So in this case, I have created a stored procedure, and yeah, so I have passed this my data type in a TVP variable along with other parameters, and so what this is essentially just reading everything from that table and inserting into another table along with the occupation code. So yeah, this is how you use table value parameter, and I'm going to show you how this actually works. The benefit of using this approach is there are temporary tables also which we could have used, but this table value parameters basically requires a very few locking resources. They are kind of private to the stored procedure or the function in which they are used. So basically, if multiple users are working, so this is basically the scope is limited to the stored procedure itself. Whereas in case of temporary tables, that is not the case. So basically, the locking problem is not there with the table value parameter. And DML is also like you cannot modify the table value parameter if you're using it in a stored procedure or a function. So basically, you cannot add or delete any columns from those from that table value parameter. So the routines that use them basically incur fewer recompiles than those using the temp tables. And if we look at the Microsoft documentation about this, so overall it performs it provides a better performance than the temporary tables. So yeah, I'm going to show you now how we kind of use this in our application. So I have written another endpoint in which I am again going to pass the month ID, and I think the name is not required. The name is not required because it is going to generate the data and return the data at the same time. So this is going to store procedure with create data at TVP. Yeah, so here I can see the result is written on the API call itself. So if I look at the stored procedure that is generating this data, yeah, so again, okay, I'll first show you how the table value parameter, where you can see the table value parameter. So in the programmability section, you can see there are types section, and there is a user defined table types. So I have created this my data type itself, which is basically the same table structure as my data sets. Okay, and I can use this my data type in here in my stored procedure. So basically, I have created a variable my data type, the TVP variable of type my data type, and instead of this external source where it generates the persistent data set, I'm just inserting the data into the TVP. So there are, if you see here, there is no data set generated when I created this demo3 data set. And I am inserting it into this TVP and I am just returning the data from this table value parameter. So this is how, this is basically the way we have used table value parameter. And again, this is this endpoint is returning the data only for a single month. And as I said, we could use this in multiple. If I give a range of months, say I give even 7 here, it will generate the data for all 3 months. With another stored procedure here. So yeah, this is the stored procedure it is calling internally. Yeah, so it is essentially calling the same create data TVP with a month ID, and this is just calling it in a loop for the given range of month. And again, there is a my data type TVP that I have created, and it is just inserting into the same table value parameter and returning all the data from that TVP. This is actually how we have used also in our case for returning a range of data. Yeah, this is all I have right now, and you can find this demo code on my GitHub repo. And again, you can read more about TVP from this Microsoft documentation. They provide a you can check there are some limitations with TVP also, like I think there are no statistics generated for table value parameter, unlike the temporary tables. But yeah, I mean, so it depends on how you want to use TVP. Like if it suits your use case, then they are very performant, and you should go for that. So yeah, that is all I have.
So good or bad to use nowadays? Okay, the question is stored procedure good or bad to use nowadays?
That depends on what type of application you are having. So actually, since in our case, everything was in the stored procedure. So and as I mentioned that the core logic itself was written in the stored procedure. So there was not much of a choice. We had to stick to using the stored procedure. But yeah, I mean, if you don't want to put the business logic on your on the database side, then definitely you should not use stored procedure. That is again, that is not that depends on the kind of the type of application that you are developing.
Right, right. And many of the times we see that when we use stored procedures, right, then
Yes.
it's one database call, IO call that you are making from your
Right.
server to the database. And
Yeah.
if you are having multiple DTOs generated at your .NET side or Node.js side, then you have to make multiple calls from your
Multiple
application.
Right.
You have to manage a lot of raw query, join queries in your server .NET code, or which is very, very difficult to manage. So
yeah, and sometimes it returns in poor performance also. Like if you are making multiple database calls, as Ritesh mentioned. So yeah, I mean that is again a kind of a
use
trade-off.
case basis, trade-off
Yes,
basically.
correct.
Yes. So if you want good performance, then we go for a stored procedure. But sometimes we want to maintain the single responsibility principle, as you said mentioned. So in that case, maybe you create multiple DTOs and write your query language in your application itself. I don't think we have any more questions, so we can end this presentation today. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for joining. Have a great day.